Still not even focus too much on colors, because if this temperature relationship is right, you can have the most whack colors and it can still feel like flesh. And you can see paintings that, take a color swab of the lights from one painting into another and it would feel completely gray. But in that painting itself, it has this very lifelike flesh, and it's just the relationship of the other temperatures and colors around it. But to keep that kind of ratio of the highlights cool, the lights warm, the halftones cool, and the shadows slightly warm, there's not that many things in painting that are like tips and tricks, or like kind of simple things that will get you results. I think this could be one of them. You can paint a skin tone, just like a blobby flesh bag of meat, if you don't know how to draw and like articulate the bones and like stuff like that, right? But it is a hugely helpful tip, and something that our predecessors painting figured out could save you a lot of time by just implementing their genius discoveries with how light works like that. So I'm kind of going over and always continue to refine the drawing a bit more. Also thinking about how the light is affecting like the form, like the arm, and trying to mass in the lights, have it turn the form into the slightly cooler notes. Oftentimes you'll see that I kind of like apply a highlight and I do the same thing, like adding more details, see how it reads, and then take it away. That's the thing with painting is, and especially with this, the way I go about a painting, is nothing's permanent. Like you think of oil, it's like a permanent thing. Like, no, it's not. You can scrape it off, you can sand it, you can fan it, brush it when it's wet. You can, you're not stuck to anything. And I think if you zoom into one area too much and you say like, oh, this thumbnail is absolutely perfect, that's going to destroy your painting, because to be able to make any changes, all your decisions going forward will be to preserve the thumbnail. But maybe the thumbnail needs to be moved a little bit, but you don't want to do that because it's so, quote unquote, perfect. Anything you do once, you can do again. You'll see a lot of painters, like historical, just absolute masters. You see that they like put this brushstroke and it feels so fluid, so dynamic, and so like kind of intuitive and spontaneous, of just like this brush mark, and it just fits on the form perfectly and it articulates like the highlight of the nose or something. It's just one kind of motion that just captures it perfectly. That probably, or doesn't necessarily have to be that artist's first attempt to do that. You can have these like happy accidents, quote, happen, or these like perfect situations happen. Those can happen, but any mark you do, it's the artist's conscious decision to leave it or to take it away. So oftentimes, artists, and I've found this to be my own, like especially with the nose highlight, you'll see me adding it, removing it multiple times throughout the process. You can attempt these things as many times as you want until you get it just right. Don't get so caught up on the idea that you finish something, everything else has to conform around it, because you're going to get a really weak painting that way. Nothing is so important and so precious that it can't be scraped and sanded down. And oftentimes that's super helpful when I'm stuck in the process in a painting and I feel like I can't move it forward. I'll take like pumice, like like the volcanic like stone. You can get like pumice, like grounded down pumice, and you can like rub it on the painting, and it just like, it's like a very subtle sandpaper, but it just kind of sands it down a bit more. And just like kind of scraping it back with a palette knife, anything that kind of just like opens up the painting again. And so then you can dive back in and start finding things again. I think it was Harold Speed, he talked about the concept of dither. He said that like this word means basically it's the process of like finding the edge, like finding the drawing, losing it, and refinding it again, finding things again. It actually like builds a sort of like strength and an energy and a vitality into a painting. I think that's very good. So I think my process is very similar to breathing, where I'm kind of tightening up areas and then expanding on it and like loosening things up. And I think having the mental framework to, when things aren't going right, maybe you just need to start losing information and kind of take a couple steps back. This process is very organic of building a painting. It's not like following an IKEA book or like building Legos. So you can see now, like with the portrait of the head now, all these like little dots on it. That's just like me kind of scraping it back and trying to keep the shadows light as well. It's kind of another trick, like not a trick, but a pattern to capture kind of the naturalistic kind of light effect is to build up more paint in the lights and keep the shadows very thin. Obviously, you can find amazing paintings with very thick shadows and very thick dark paint. So this isn't at all like an absolute thing, but it is an effect. I like how it helps kind of turn the form and it keeps the shadows kind of simplified. This is kind of the way I go. This isn't like an absolute or anything like that. There's not really any like absolutes like that. So I'm scraping back, keeping things light. So allows me to kind of refine the drawing again. Trying to be very conscious on to make the shapes interesting and engaging. Shouldn't have any line that's the same for like more than like a centimeter. So you should always be thinking of like, you know, how the contour, what is it doing? Like, is it overlapping the form? How hard, how soft is this edge? What's it connecting to? Really finds like within the strength of the solidity of it, these very subtle indications, because it's so easy to go overboard. Specifically, I see in like people just starting painting arms, like when they're trying to articulate these overlaps, you know, they accentuate them so much. But especially with the arms, these overlaps and things are very subtle, of the high points and low points. That's another good kind of mental note. It's very binary, so it helps you think very concretely of what needs to change. You could think when you're thinking of the contour of like where's the highest, like the widest point, where's the highest point, the lowest point, because oftentimes like where it's super subtle, like, I don't know, maybe like this side of my head here, like where is this widest point where there's this angle break that comes into my jaw? It's very subtle, but if you can articulate like just mentally even and just put a little note, like it's exactly here, then you can kind of start relating things together a bit more. Relate things that are very distant from each other. It just brings things more connected together. So now I'm starting to work kind of a bit more confidently of placement of things. I'm using a slightly smaller brush. I'm using a mix of like hawk hair bristle brushes and a bit of like some synthetic filbert and a few like rounded brushes as well. Like turn the form and trying to think about these more nuanced things of what information do I want hidden? What do I want the focus to be? Where do I want the most contrast? Where do I want the most saturation or kind of warmth? And then also like the actual like impasto, the amount of paint I'm applying as well. Trying to like indicate some of these high points of the face, maybe like the zygomat, or these like more bony points will have a bit more like, you know, how do I treat the paint that way versus kind of these like kind of fatty, like cheek, like kind of fleshy parts of the face. Trying to think about that. I always try to capture that contrast of like under the eyes above where it's like super bony, you know, you got the zygomat, and then all the like flesh of the face that just kind of hangs off. Oftentimes, you know, you can make areas feel softer by making other areas hard, like kind of sharper, and vice versa. And so always trying to play with dichotomies because there's a lot of strength that gets created when you have these kind of conflicting ideas, conflicting ways of painting, conflicting, like all these like things, but then they're coming together in some sort of harmony. Oftentimes in like a lot of like the really like master great portrait paintings, if you cover like with your hand, like cover half the painting and you just looked at like half the face like with one eye and then you do it to the other side, oftentimes they'll have a slightly different emotion. Sometimes it's very extreme, but like you know, if you think of, is this guy happy, is he sad, is he, you know, what's his take? Sometimes they're kind of opposite. Like one side it looks kind of more like awe-inspired, and the other side looks kind of disparaging just by like covering half the eye. And so I think that's a very intentional thing of creating this sort of hard to fully define in words. That it has this kind of spiritual, this kind of mysterious, ephemeral quality to the like the gaze, to the face, and that's something that I've always been really attracted to in paintings, and it's something I think about a lot, and that has to do with this dichotomy. Back into the draperies, I'm trying to add some more color variation instead of just like, you know, scumbling things in with lead white and then like a kind of a shadow color. I'm trying to think about some of the reflections, some of these like overlaps, like there's a lot of kind of yellows and cools, and so I'm thinking about like warms and cools and trying to keep the lights very connected, but make this a very Baroque kind of flowing piece of fabric. Now this might be interesting to kind of talk about the specific colors I'm using in this painting. I'm using lead white. In the early stages, I'm using just pure lead white for the white. Later stages, which I'm starting to use now in this draper as I'm building it up, I'm actually using, it's a mix of lead white with crystal, with like grounded crystal. So it's from Natural Pigments. It's called Crystal White, and it's like a 50-50 lead white and like kind of a crystal, which basically it keeps, it's kind of heavy and kind of elastic like lead white, but it's more transparent. And so you can kind of build up the body, but then you still have this like kind of stained glass, luminous effect of some of these, the kind of what's happening underneath kind of shining through a little bit. And so that's something I've liked and I've been kind of playing around with. Sometimes I use that. Sometimes I just use lead white all the way to the end and maybe add a bit of like stand oil or a little bit of like a Velasquez medium, which is I think like heat bodied linseed oil with like a chalk to get it like very stringy. And so I'm kind of playing around with different mediums and stuff like that. My colors, I try to keep them very essential. There's this like harmony within them all. So I'll use like, a yellow ochre or like a red ochre, like very small amounts of like a transparent red brown or oxide or a transparent red oxide, like a alizarin claret, which is like a permanent alizarin crimson. It's very, very cold chromatic red, hardly any, but it's how I can kind of get like the pinky red notes in the face. That's the color I use for that. Like Castle Earth, which is like a very dark raw umber, but it dries much faster than ivory black, so it works really nice. Oftentimes I start the painting not using any ivory black. The Castle Earth is my darkest until I kind of get everything blocked in, and then I start bumping up the contrast even more, mixing in a bit of ivory black into my painting process. But I love Castle Earth because it's very lean in terms of oil content, so it works great to use on the underlayers, like kind of respecting the fat over lean process or principle. So you have kind of leaner, less fatty mixes early on. You can kind of build the more kind of oily, like fatty later stages, which in contrast to the Castle Earth, ivory black or bone black is it requires a lot of oil to make the paint. It's very thirsty for oil. So a side effect of that also is that it takes a little longer to dry. So that's just like something I keep in mind. I keep those two as my darks, the Castle Earth and ivory black as my darks. And then I'm depending on the process of the stage of the painting, I'm weighing off the contrast, like how dark I can get it versus the drying speed and the oil content. And so I'm kind of playing those two keys in different ways. I'm using phthalo green, introducing it a little bit with like my transparent red oxide and stuff like that into the cactuses in the back. And if you have any experience with phthalo green, it will destroy your painting so fast because it's so chromatic. So I don't use that in pretty much any painting really. I'm just kind of that's kind of my one guest paint for this painting. I was curious to play around with it. I thought it could be an interesting extension to the palette, and I exclusively only used that into cactus. I made sure it wasn't anywhere else in the painting, just because of how intensively chromatic it can be. But I do really like that color, even though it's very dangerous. Okay, so in this stage of the painting, I'm starting to think in a bit more finalizing way. And so I'm trying to cover in these kind of like remaining kind of whole like canvases kind of showing through the paint and trying to get things to be a bit more clean and kind of refined and finished. And so the idea of this is I'd like to kind of leave every passage as if I didn't have to, I wasn't able to come back and touch it again. It was done. Mentally, that's the way I think. And then in reality, I'm able to come back to it one or two times, maybe one time like in a section, like kind of refining things even more. And then maybe another time as just like kind of tapping, clicking everything together on like a more macro scale of like working with everything at the same time. But I'm starting to think now of like the final appearance of how I want it. So basically everything up until this last stage is just prepping everything, getting all the color, everything, the drawing to kind of relate to each other. And now I'm like coming in for the kill and like really trying to create something that is very aesthetically beautiful, and that would really convey the storyline that I'm wanting to, and the intention of this painting. I'm going through this, like what we talked about with opening up the drawing and kind of going back, adding more details, removing it, and this kind of polarity between the two. Another process is the actual like where my attention is going to the painting is I think you need both. You need to zoom out and see the painting as a whole, stand back from a distance, do a lot of the painting from observing from a distance, but then you also need to be able to get up close and really kind of refine things. The interesting thing that I realized is like going to museums is the paintings that will catch you from across the room. Like you see it from a distance and you're like, something about it just pulls you in. That was very intentional. And I guarantee you any artist that has that effect on you, they painted that painting from observing it from a very far distance away. So they were really trying to look at that from a distance. And sometimes when you get up close to the painting, you need both. Some paintings, they don't capture you from a distance, but you get up close and then they capture you from a close distance. And so what I try to do is I try to, and those have that effect because the painter was looking at them very closely and they were doing that painting. And so I trying to do both of that with mine, which I want it to read really powerfully from a distance, but then as the viewer gets closer and closer to it, I want it to kind of turn into a different painting where they can observe it from a closer distance and see and appreciate all these kind of nuance and kind of close-up things. I think that's what's so cool about viewing artwork in real life is you can do that. On photographs, you have the same 2-inch by 3-inch square or rectangle on your phone that you're viewing, a 20 feet by 30 foot painting versus 8 by 10 painting, and they're all the same size on your phone. And so that's what's so cool about viewing things in life is you can see the actual like physical presence that the painting has. And oftentimes it's largely dictated by the actual process of the paint. The actual like studio of the artist, like how much space they had. Like, were they able to walk way back and look at it for a distance, or were they in a closet or a cell in a monastery or something like that making the painting? These are all things that play an important part into the actual appearance, the actual readability, and the power of a painting that you can't get from looking at it from a photo.